We're back, and we're going to do the third installment of The Blue Moose by Daniel Manus Pinkwater. So if you haven't seen the other two chapters, you should go back and watch those first. And if you're continuing on, this title of this particular chapter is Dave. Dave is a hermit. And let's go ahead and see what this is all about. Not very far from Mr. Breton's house is a secret place in the woods. Lived a hermit named Dave. Everybody knew that Dave was out there, but nobody ever saw him. Mr. Bobowitz, the game warden, had seen what might have been Dave a couple of times, or it might have been a shadow. Sometimes late at night, Mr. Breton would hear the wind whistling strangely, and he would think of Dave. The moose brought Dave home with him one night. They were old friends. Dave was dressed in rabbit skins stitched together, and his feet were wrapped in tree bark and moose moss. An owl sat on his head. "Oh, Dave is very shy," said the moose. "He would appreciate it if you didn't say anything to him until he knows you better. Maybe, I don't know, 10 or 15 years. He knows about your gingerbread, and he would like to try it." While the moose spoke, Dave blushed very red and tried to cover his face with the owl, which fluttered and squawked. Mr. Breton put dishes with gingerbread and applesauce and fresh whipped cream in front of Dave, the moose, and the owl. There was no noise but the moose slurping, and Dave, his spoon, was scraping the bowl. Mr. Breton turned to get the coffee pot, and when he looked back at the table, Dave and the owl were gone. "Dave says thank you," says the moose. The next night, Dave was back, and this time he had a whistle made out of a turkey bone in his hat. After the gingerbread, Dave played on the whistle like the wind making strange sounds. The moose hummed, and Mr. Breton clicked 2 spoons, while the owl hopped up and down on the kitchen table far into the night. Do you see the owl on the table doing his little dance? That's the part that I like. He's like right over here somewhere. Let's see. Oh, maybe Mr. Doe's finger was covering the owl. Now it's more fun, right? Okay. He's there. Another chapter. Hums of a Moose. One day, after the moose had been staying with Mr. Breton for a fairly long time, there was an especially heavy snowfall. The snow got to be as high as the house, and there was no way for people to come from the town. Mr. Breton got a big fire going in the stove and kept adding pieces of wood until the stove was glowing red. The house was warm, and it was filled with the smell of applesauce, which Mr. Breton was cooking in big pots on the stove. Mr. Breton was peeling apples, and the moose was sitting on the floor, lapping every now and then it into a big chowder bowl full of coffee on the kitchen table. Well, I'll say that's a lot of snow. Look at that. You can barely see the house. Only the roof is sticking out. I can smell that applesauce. Can you smell it? I love applesauce. The moose didn't say anything. Mr. Breton didn't say anything. Now and then the moose would take a deep breath with his nose in the air, sniffing in the smell of apples and cinnamon and raisins cooking. And then he would sigh. The sighs got louder and louder. The moose began to hum softly and then louder. The humming made the table shake, and Mr. Breton felt the humming in his fingers each time he picked up an apple. The humming mixed with the apple and cinnamon smell and melted the frost on the windows, and the room filled with sunlight, and Mr. Breton smelt flowers. Then he could see them. The kitchen floor had turned into a meadow with new grass, dandelions, periwinkles, and daisies. The moose hummed. Mr. Breton smelled melting snow. He heard ice cracking. He felt the ground shake under the hoofs of moose returning from the low, wet places, and rabbits bounded through the fields, and bears, thin after the winter's sleep, came out of hiding, and birds sang. The people in town could not remember such an unseasonable thaw. The weather got warm all of a sudden. And the ice and the snow melted for 4 days before winter set in again. When they went to Mr. Breton's restaurant, they discovered that he had made a wonderful stew with lots of carrots that reminded them of meadows in springtime. This is going to be one last chapter for this half of the book. The name of this chapter is called Moose Moving. When spring finally came, the moose became moody. He spent a lot of time staring out the back door. Flocks of geese flew overhead, returning to the lakes in the north, and the moose always stirred when he heard their honking. Chef, the moose said one morning, I will be going tomorrow. I wonder if you would pack some gingerbread for me to take along with me. Mr. Breton baked a special batch of gingerbread, and he packed it in parcels tied with string so the moose could hang them from his antlers. When the moose came, when the moose came downstairs, Mr. Breton was sitting in the chair drinking coffee. The parcels of gingerbread were on the kitchen table. Do you want a bowl of coffee before you go? Mr. Breton said. Oh, yes, thank you, said the moose. I shall certainly miss you, Mr. Breton said. Thank you, said the moose. You are the best friend that I have, said Mr. Breton. Oh, thank you, said the moose. Do you suppose you'll ever come back? Mr. Breton asked. Not before Thursday or Friday, said the moose. It would be impolite to visit my uncle for less than a week. The moose hooked his antlers into the loops of string on the packages of gingerbread. My uncle will like this. He stood up and turned to the door. Wait, Mr. Breton shouted. Do you mean that you are not leaving forever? I thought you were lonely for the life of a wild moose. I thought you wanted to go back to the wild, free places. Seth, do you have any idea how cold it gets in the wild, free places? The moose said. And the food, it's terrible. Have a nice time at your uncle's, said Mr. Breton. I'll send you a postcard. So there's Mr. Breton. He made all the parcels of food with the loops with string. That's so it can hang on the antler of the moose. It's very kind of him, because moose don't have pockets, of course. And then on this page, we get to see the moose with the parcels hanging on his antlers. All those little packages hanging there. And what else? And then we have a letter that the moose sent. Well, that's pretty good. I really enjoy this moose. So you'll have to watch the next video to see the next part of this book called Return of the Moose. Now, if you like these stories, hit the subscribe button on down below. And I wish you well. And remember, as always, that you need to brush your teeth, you need to wash your hands. Until next time, bye-bye.